I have returned. I'm the Nerd King from Band League, and today we're doing another metagame analysis. Now, I'm sorry, last week I actually had the wrong week number for my video. It was actually week 3, not 2. So really sorry about that. But now we're in week 5. And so, the results from the last weekend, I don't really have access to yet. So I took the ones from the week before last, and I'll probably cover last weekend's in the next video. And so what we have here is GP Dublin. And so, as you can see, the decks are all over the place again. My other is this big 15.6% slice. And because we only had one top 64, that's only decks where there is exactly one of that deck in the top 64. But yeah, so just ridiculous. But Infect doing pretty well. Also over here we have Naya. And a few other decks did decent. Madcap Experiment was really good. So yeah, but just lots of different viable decks in Modern right now, even more than when the metagame first became a thing. And then moving to Standard, we have the Open in Baltimore, and because Star City Games makes these, or sets these up and does all this stuff for them, I actually only have access to their top 16. I don't think they are ever going to post their full top 64. They might, but I'm not sure. So I just went ahead. This is the top 16. As you can see, Green Black Delirium and Vehicles were very prevalent in the metagame. Again, taking half that chart at 25% each, just very close, and then immediately following up on them, as per usual, Blue White Flash. But what I really want to focus on, we have this Ban Aggro deck, and I don't actually know much about the deck. I didn't have a lot of time to research it, but it got pretty big pretty fast. It's right up there with the Black-Red Aggro, which was pretty much the only deck that could compete with the other big three. So it'll be interesting to see that develop, whether this will just be a mainstay of the format or if it's just a thing that popped up and will go away pretty quickly. Oh, I'm sorry, it's not with Black-Red Aggro, it's way above Black-Red Aggro. I had my chart mixed up. Anyway, moving on, it's time for opinions. So, as you could see back in here, we have a ton of variety in Modern, and to be honest, I don't think that's changing. The Wizards of the Coast has been working really hard to keep the Modern metagame looking like this, with just a ton of viable decks. Because the people who play Modern want that. That's how the format was born. That's how they want it to stay. And so whenever they say it's to keep the format interesting, which it is, but if you notice, a lot of their bans are to keep this extremely diverse, almost chaotic metagame. And that's great. Though the problem with that is then we end up with decks like Infect or Bots, or just very solid decks that are just generally hard to beat, end up being more and more prevalent, and Control, which has to metagame to survive in almost any format, kind of gets shoved out. And so you can kind of see that here. There are a few Control slipping in here and there. There's Jeskai over here, and I know there's at least one other, but still, there just isn't that strong of Control decks. And Red Green Tron's a big one that's stable. And so I expect this, if you go to a tournament, I would suggest playing something like Dredge, Infect, something like that, where you just can generally hold your own against most decks, pretty much regardless of what you're playing. Alright, moving to Standard, we have, this is very small scale. I expect if we expanded this, we would have a lot less Ban Aggro and more Black-Red Aggro. But it's still very interesting that the ban aggro decks did so well. I think it's actually really cool. Because we have essentially two sides of the coin here. We have the very stable metagame that's all about the small little in-game decisions making the big difference, like a scry to the top or bottom changing the game dramatically, or just the one card difference being the difference between a pro and an amateur. And then we have this, where it's not less skill intensive in any way, but it's a different type of skill intensive. It focuses more on being very up to date with the metagame and good sideboarding with these solid decks. And so a lot of people don't understand that about these metas, and kinda just play something and hope it works out, which it sometimes does, no doubt. But it's not like in these metas, where normally the in-game decisions matter a lot less in varied metas and a lot more in very narrow metas. And so, also, with narrow metas, like the standard, you're going to have a lot more focus on the very careful tuning of the deck. Whereas in a varied meta, you really can do more brewing and some very inventive things. Like, Madcap Experiment right now runs, I think, Platinum Angel and, what's the other one? Platinum Empyrean? Though I may be wrong. But still, there's a lot of variety and room to change things all over the place and totally different shells for Madcap Experiment. And so, as you can see, it's very much about a larger macro scale of deck building as opposed to tuning. And also sideboarding becomes very important, because it's kind of switches. Like, in narrow metagames, you just need to be generally right, like have things for the 5 big decks and in reasonable numbers and know when to board them in and what to board out. Or, as opposed to this, where your sideboard should be very specifically tuned for the very current metagame so that it can adapt just right to beat enemy decks. And so that the main purpose of tuning in a wide metagame like this is for the sideboard, because the main decks tend to be brewed and wider, and so they're not concrete, and there's certainly still room for improvement there, but it just doesn't matter as much. Alright, so moving on. Predictions. So, as I kind of mentioned, I think we're just going to see continued variety, and if it goes away from that, say Madcap Experiment becomes too prevalent, I think Wizards will just shove it back towards that area with a ban. They might not do it very well, admittedly, but if you look at, like, they do get it right eventually. We had a bit of a break, I guess, where a lot of decks were getting banned, like between Birthing Pod banning and the most recent banning. There were a lot fewer decks than there are now and there were at the beginning of the format. And the reason there were a lot of decks at the beginning of the format is actually more than just the fact that it was a new format and people didn't know what to expect. I believe it also had a fairly small ban list for the time. And to be totally honest, I think they could have predicted some of the things they ended up banning later, like Deathrite Shaman and Birthing Pod seemed really broken. Splinter Twin, I'll give them credit for. Same with not Amulet, what did they ban? They banned Summer Bloom, I think. Anyway, I'll give them credit for those, because those were a bit trickier and more about how the meta ended up being. But I think Birthing Pod and Deathrite Shaman honestly just could have been on the original Modern ban list. Or, my bad. I don't think Deathrite Shaman was out yet. Maybe not Birthing Pod either. But anyway, you see my point. It had a fairly small ban list, and so there were a lot of decks that could exist. And some were fair, some were not. And so the meta eventually shifted out, and they had to start banning things. But my point is, eventually they'll get it right, and they'll get their modern metagame to looking like something like this. The only problem with the way they have it set up right now is these two decks. Dredge and Infect. These Dredge got way too much support. I think they wanted Dredge to be a thing, and I am fine with that. And that's why they unbanned Golgari Grave Troll. Here's the problem. Dredge didn't come back with just Golgari Grave Troll, so they had to give it more support. And so they gave it Insolent Neonate, and then it was doing pretty well. And yet they still decided to throw a Catharic Reunion. And all of a sudden, it's your deck to beat in the format. And so Infect and bots fall into the category of like narrowers. Because even though Wizards wants Modern to be a very varied format, they need something to limit the population of decks, or the metagame is just a mess, and I couldn't even be doing a video on it right now. There'd just be too many different decks. And so they have two big limiting decks that keep really bad decks out of the format. And those are Bots and Infect. And both these decks are pretty good at what they do. And the other big thing they do is it's hard because Bots and Infect both, for almost any deck, they ask you to have cards in your sideboard or mainboard just for them and to beat them. And you're supposed to, or at least for Bots. And so that means that all the decks across the board are pretty close to equally good against Bots, unless you're like mono black or something. But as long as you have decent colors, there's probably something for you. But that means even if they get broken decks, like what just happened with the Eldrazi deck, Bots can still be there because it's broken, and Eldrazi gets the same tools as everyone else to beat it. So it's just like you play those cards and keep Bots at the level it is, but Bots doesn't care how powerful the rest of the format is to an extreme, but for the most part it doesn't care. It can just do the same thing all the time. And Infect's very similar in many respects. Now, it doesn't ask for as many specific cards, but it asks for more mainboardish cards. Like, I think Infect is a large part of the reason spells like Lightning Bolt are so prevalent, and others such like burn style removal. There's not really all that much you want it against other than that. And there certainly are other things, don't get me wrong. Eldrazi isn't a fan, Dredge doesn't necessarily like it. But it's a bit more general, but it also asks a bit more of your main board in order to beat it. And so that now their Bots and Infect are trying to limit keeping the format down from being complete craziness, just whatever you want. And yet we still have pretty good variety. So to be honest, I think it's a pretty great time to be playing Modern. Now, pros like the narrow format, and I do too, because I'm a tuner and not a brewer. But I think the popular opinion is that this is not a very fun format, and I can't really blame you. But it is the format we're in, and I don't think it's necessarily solved, because there's been ban aggro. I think these decks fall within the same areas enough that you could maybe find a way to beat them with enough work. But it's still awkward, and oftentimes, unless you have a lot of time on your hand, you'll just get a better result tuning than brewing in this format. So yeah, alright. Now moving to our upcoming events, we have the Standard Showdown begins on November 26th, guys. Or the weekend of that, November 26th. So basically, what the Standard Showdown is there's going to be 4 weeks, and on each, wasn't able to find a lot of the details, that I did try and look, but I'm pretty sure that each week there's a tournament, and you get a chance to win a special pack with 2 rares or mythic rares, and 1 promotional foil thing that could be an expedition or a masterpiece. So yeah, that's pretty awesome. It's going to be all be standard and only standard. Wizards was pretty clear about that. And there's enough of them around the country and the world that there probably is one near you. So yeah, check it out. It should be really fun. It's 4-round tournaments. I think the time's like set by your store. And then I doubt any of you will be participating. And if you are, great. But the World Magic Cup is this weekend, and that's gonna be awesome. I'm hoping to be able to spectate that. It should be pretty cool. I think it's like 16 of the world's best players facing off to be the world's best. And in case you're wondering, it's gonna be a lot the Pro Tour winners, the people with the top pro points in their region, and a few people who qualify through World Magic Cup qualifiers, just things like that. In case you want to know who participates, I'm sure you can look it up online somewhere. And then there's Star City Games Open Knoxville. Yay! That's going to be standard and this weekend. So if you're not tuning into the World Magic Cup, I'll assume you're going to the Open, right? And then next weekend, same weekend as the Standard Showdown, we have the Grand Prix Chiba, which is Legacy format. And so that reminds me to talk about, there was a Legacy GP this weekend, and I decided not to cover their metagame. So sorry to all you Eternal fans, but the problem is it doesn't change enough. I do plan on doing maybe an Eternal format video in the future. Maybe if things are slow in the rest of the Magic world at the time, and then I'll probably go pretty deep into the metagame and talk about it for a while. Maybe I'll even do 2 weeks, one for Legacy, one for Vintage. I don't know yet. But my point is, I left out the Legacy metagame because it's generally pretty stable. Not a lot of questions really there, and I'm probably going to do the same thing with Chiba. So just so you guys are aware of that. And alright, that's it. Thank you guys for watching. I hope to see all you guys later. Yeah, see ya.